Hong Kong. Golden Harvest Studios, 1973, 2:15 a.m. The air inside the soundstage is a thick soup of humidity, stale tobacco, and the ozone of cooling studio lights. The set is officially closed. The union crews have long since gone home, their echoes replaced by the rhythmic drip of a leaking pipe somewhere in the rafters. No cameras are loaded. No press was invited. No second takes are possible. This was a meeting that, by all accounts, was never supposed to leave that stage. I've spent 20 years as a stunt coordinator, bouncing between the chaotic backlots of Hong Kong and the polished sets of Los Angeles. I've seen the difference between movie magic and real damage. My authority doesn't come from a film school degree. It comes from the bruises earned on sets where the cameras weren't always rolling. I don't care for the posters or the hype. I care about what happened when the lights went down and the uninvited guests showed up. In the Hong Kong film industry of the 70s, you either paid the tax or you stopped filming. It was a simple, brutal equation. This is the story of the night the underworld tried to tax the dragon. It's the one confrontation the studio executives spent decades trying to bury, and it all started 3 weeks earlier with a red envelope left on a director's chair. You have to understand the landscape of that era. In 1973, Bruce Lee was the biggest star in Asia. He was a bridge between East and West, a man who was literally redefining what it meant to be an action hero. But in the shadows of Kowloon and the back alleys of the new territories, fame is just a larger target. To the Triads, Bruce wasn't a legend. He was a revenue stream. They saw a multi-million-dollar production like Enter the Dragon, and they saw a cake they hadn't been invited to slice. The man behind the pressure was a local boss named Lao Shen. He was known for controlling the territories surrounding the studios, a man who prided himself on a wall of muscle reputation. He didn't use subtle threats. He used presence. He used the weight of numbers. When the red envelope appeared, a symbolic demand for protection money, the studio panicked. To the executives, it was just the cost of doing business. You pay the fee, the trucks don't get hijacked, the lights don't accidentally fall from the rigging, and the stars don't get their faces cut. But Bruce was different. He didn't see it as a business expense. He saw it as a fundamental challenge to the economy of power he had spent his entire life mastering. The atmosphere on the set changed instantly. For 2 weeks, the production felt like it was under siege. Men in dark suits would stand at the edge of the property, just watching. Occasionally, a piece of equipment would go missing. A generator would be tampered with. The director wanted to negotiate. The studio wanted to write a check and make the problem vanish. Bruce, however, spent those 2 weeks in a state of total, chilling silence. He wasn't shouting or throwing tantrums. He was practicing a single flick of the wrist over and over in his private trailer. He was preparing for a different kind of negotiation. He knew that if you pay a wolf to stay away, the wolf just gets hungrier. He decided to invite the wolf onto the porch. He sent word back through the channels. No money would be exchanged, but a demonstration would be held. A private meeting on the Hans Island set, after midnight, with no lawyers and no police. Just the principals and a few witnesses to ensure that whatever happened stayed within the walls of the studio. When the night finally arrived, the tension was a physical weight. I remember the way the shadows stretched across the artificial rocks of the set. Lao Shen arrived with 3 enforcers, thick-necked men who looked like they were carved from granite. They didn't come to talk. They came to intimidate. They looked at the empty set, the fake scenery, and they sneered. To them, this was all a playground. They saw Bruce as a showman, a product of clever editing and high-speed film. They believed that in a world of real violence, celluloid muscles meant nothing. Bruce was waiting for them in the center of the stage, flanked only by 2 of his most trusted stuntmen. He was wearing a simple tracksuit, his posture completely relaxed, his hands at his sides. He looked small compared to Lao Shen, who stood nearly a head taller and 50 pounds heavier. Lao Shen began to mock him immediately. He spoke about how the movies had gone to Bruce's head, how he had forgotten who really owned the streets of Hong Kong. He wanted to prove that the dragon was just a lizard under the right light. Bruce didn't interrupt him. He waited for the echoes of the boss's laughter to die down against the corrugated metal walls of the studio. Then he spoke. His voice was low, devoid of any anger or bravado. He proposed a rule. It was simple, surgical, and terrifyingly confident. Bruce would stand exactly 1 arm's length away from Lao Shen. He told the boss that if he could react, if he could move his hand, flinch, or even blink with intent, before Bruce finished a single motion, the tax would be paid in full for the duration of the film. But if he failed to react, the Triads would leave the set and never return. No more envelopes, no more accidents. Lao Shen looked at the distance between them. 1 arm's length. It's the dead zone. In any combat theory, that's the range where a human being should have the advantage of reaction time. You can see the shoulder twitch, you can see the eyes narrow. Lao Shen was a fighter. He had survived the street wars of the 50s. He believed his reflexes were honed by survival, not choreography. He accepted. This is where the legend meets the reality. Lao Shen squared his shoulders and planted his feet. He was a man of brute force, a titan who believed in the old way of intimidation through size. He stared into Bruce's eyes, looking for the tell. He was waiting for the wind-up, the shift in weight, the tightening of the jaw that signals a strike. But Bruce remained like water. He wasn't looking at the man, he was looking through him. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a single cigarette, unlit. He asked Lao Shen to hold it between two fingers, horizontal, right in front of his chest. The boss smirked, thinking this was some kind of parlor trick. He gripped the cigarette tightly, his eyes locked on Bruce's hands. The three enforcers moved closer, their breath visible in the cool night air. The two stuntmen stood perfectly still, knowing that what was about to happen wasn't in any script they had ever read. For 3 seconds, nobody in that room breathed. The silence was so absolute, you could hear the hum of the distant city. Lao Shen's fingers were tensed, ready to snap shut or pull away the moment Bruce made a move. He was convinced he could win on pure reflex alone. And then it happened. It was a move so fast the human eye couldn't process it. There was no sound of a footstep, no rustle of fabric. One moment the cigarette was between Lao Shen's fingers. The next, it was gone. Bruce was standing in the exact same position, his hands seemingly never having moved from his sides. Lao Shen's fingers were still frozen in the air, gripping nothing but empty space. His brain hadn't even registered that his hand was empty until he looked down and saw his own bare skin. He didn't just lose the object, he lost the very concept of his own speed. The enforcers blinked, looking at each other in confusion. They hadn't seen it either. It was as if Bruce had simply edited himself out of the timeline for a fraction of a second. But Lao Shen wasn't ready to give up. His ego was too large to be bruised by a vanishing act. He turned red, his face contorting with a mix of embarrassment and rage. He claimed it was a magic trick, a sleight of hand he hadn't been prepared for. He demanded a real test of power. He wanted to feel the force. He stepped closer, closing the distance until they were chest to chest, the heat of his anger radiating off him. He told Bruce that tricks wouldn't save him in a real fight. He challenged him to actually land a blow, to show that his movie muscles had any weight behind them. He was calling the bluff of the century, betting that Bruce wouldn't dare strike a Triad boss in his own territory. But Bruce didn't flinch. He just nodded slowly, his expression remaining as calm as a mountain lake. And that was only the beginning of the night the dragon truly woke up. Lao Shen stood there, his chest heaving, his face a mask of wounded pride. He had been humiliated by a cigarette and a blur of movement, and in the world of the Hong Kong Triads, humiliation is a debt that must be paid in blood. He stepped even closer to Bruce, so close that the bill of his cap was inches from the dragon's forehead. He wasn't just invading Bruce's personal space, he was trying to suffocate his composure. The three enforcers behind him shifted their weight, their hands disappearing into the pockets of their dark jackets. We all knew what was in those pockets. This wasn't a movie set anymore. This was the edge of a precipice. Lao Shen's voice was a guttural growl when he finally spoke. He told Bruce that speed was for children and magicians, but in a real fight, power was the only currency that mattered. He challenged Bruce to deliver a real strike. He wanted to feel the impact, to prove that a man of his size could absorb anything a movie star could throw. But then, everything shifted. Bruce didn't back away. He didn't even raise his guard. He looked at Lao Shen with a level of detached intensity that I've only seen in apex predators. He agreed to the test, but he added a final, chilling condition. He told Lao Shen that he would deliver a full-power strike, a blow meant to end a confrontation instantly, but he promised that he would not leave a single mark on the boss's skin. He claimed he could execute a no-touch kill, a strike that would stop precisely 1 millimeter from the target. To the boss, this sounded like more theatrical nonsense. He laughed, a short, barking sound that echoed through the rafters. He planted his feet, braced his core, and dared Bruce to try. He thought he was calling a bluff. He didn't realize he was volunteering for a surgical demolition of his own nervous system. For 10 seconds, the studio was a tomb. The only sound was the low hum of the electrical transformers. Bruce took a deep breath, and I watched his entire body undergo a transformation. His muscles didn't bulge, they seemed to vibrate. He wasn't just preparing a punch, he was aligning every ounce of his kinetic energy into a single point. He was at zero distance, the most dangerous range in combat because there is no time to accelerate. Most fighters need a wind-up to generate power. Bruce didn't need a wind-up. He had mastered the mechanics of the one-inch principle, where the power comes from the hips, the knees, and the sudden explosive snap of the spine. What few realize is what happened next. Bruce didn't just punch. He launched his entire being forward in a fraction of a second. His fist moved with such violent velocity that it created a literal shockwave of air. The sound wasn't a thud. It was a sharp, whip-cracking pop that hurt the ears. The fist stopped exactly where he promised, a hair's breadth from Lao Shen's Adam's apple. Bruce's knuckles were close enough to feel the heat of the boss's skin, but there was no physical contact. Then came the part that was never supposed to leak. Lao Shen didn't just flinch. He didn't just step back. His eyes rolled into the back of his head, his knees turned to water, and he collapsed backward into the dust of the soundstage floor. He didn't fall because he was hit. He fell because his body's primitive survival mechanisms had been overwhelmed. It's what we call a vasovagal response. When the brain perceives a lethal threat moving at a speed it cannot calculate, it sometimes simply shuts the system down. The sheer wind of the blow, combined with the psychological terror of a man who could stop a killing strike at that velocity, caused the boss's nervous system to short-circuit. He hit the ground like a sack of wet sand, gasping for air that his lungs had forgotten how to process. The enforcers froze. They were looking at their leader, a man they thought was invincible, broken on the floor without being touched. They looked at Bruce, who was already standing back in his relaxed posture, his hands at his sides, his breathing perfectly rhythmic. He wasn't looking at the fallen boss with triumph. He was looking at him with a quiet, almost sad realization. He had proven his point. He had shown them that in the presence of true mastery, brute force is an illusion. The two stuntmen on either side of Bruce didn't move an inch. They knew that if the enforcers pulled their weapons, the room would turn into a slaughterhouse, and they knew who would be left standing. The atmosphere in the room changed instantly. The aggression evaporated, replaced by a primal, bone-deep fear. One of the enforcers stepped forward, not to fight but to help Lao Shen to his feet. The boss was trembling, his face pale, his eyes wide with a kind of shock that you don't recover from in a day. He didn't say a word. He didn't look at Bruce. He couldn't. He had seen the void, and he knew that Bruce had chosen to spare him. The dragon hadn't just protected the film set. He had dismantled the very foundation of Lao Shen's authority. If word got out that a movie star had made the Triad boss collapse with a ghost punch, Lao Shen's career in the underworld would be over. Bruce spoke one last time, his voice calm and final. He told them the tax was settled. He told them the set was a place of work, not a territory. Lao Shen nodded, a small jerky motion, and gestured for his men to leave. They retreated into the Hong Kong night, their footsteps echoing until the heavy studio doors groaned shut. And just like that, the threat that had been looming over the production for weeks simply vanished. The studio executives were ecstatic when they heard the Triads were backing off, but they were also terrified. They spent the next several months making sure that no one who was in that room ever spoke to the press. They didn't want the world to know that their multi-million-dollar investment was being settled with midnight duels. They wanted the public to see the movie star, not the man who was capable of stopping a heart with a flick of his wrist. Witness accounts differ on the exact details. Some say the boss fainted, others say he begged for mercy. But the outcome was the same. The red envelopes stopped arriving. The accidents on set ceased. I've spent 40 years in this business, and I've seen some of the best fighters in the world. I've seen the heavy hitters and the technicians. But that night at Golden Harvest taught me a lesson I never forgot. Real power doesn't need to leave a bruise to leave a scar. Bruce Lee understood that the greatest fight is the one that ends before the other man realizes it has begun. He didn't use anger. He used physics and a terrifying level of psychological dominance. He proved that a disciplined mind is the only weapon that never misses. The world can doubt the stories. They can say it's all part of the Bruce Lee mythos, a legend grown too large for the truth. But I was there. I saw the way the dust settled on the floor. I saw the look in Lao Shen's eyes when he realized he was already dead before he could even blink. This was the moment the dragon became more than a name. It was the moment he became a reality that the underworld simply couldn't afford to challenge again. In the end, the dragon didn't need to fight the underworld. He simply showed them that they were already outmatched. And what happened in those few seconds was real enough to change every man who was in that room. The world may have seen Enter the Dragon, but we saw the man who didn't need the cameras to be legendary.